So we're almost at the end of this morning. I think that what you said about Internet of Industry, and it's very important also for what's going to happen in the afternoon, because there are like roundtables to work on a paper to give advices to the Commission. So Industry 4.0 is very important, digital manufacturing. And it has been a great morning for us. And like in the Broadway show, the best is yet to come. And there is a buzzword in the startup ecosystem, which is unicorn. And when we talk about unicorn in Europe, usually everybody's mind is going to think about Riccardo Zacconi. Riccardo, the King Zacconi.
I'll try to disrupt the rules just to keep you awake. So I have the good news and bad news. I start with the bad news first. The bad news is that I'm the last thing between where we are now and the piatto of pasta. Right? So the good news is that I don't have a presentation. So we'll be very interactive. Don't look at the screen. And actually, I'm making up the presentation as we speak because I haven't written a speech. So first of all, a couple of words about myself, because I think I would like to talk a bit what we have done. Because from there, I think I have a couple of things which I would like to take as learnings. So as Riccardo was saying, I'm also called Riccardo, and I'm not a king, but we created a company called King, which you might not know, but I hope that you have played one of our games, which is called Candy Crush. Actually, we've developed more than one game. We have other 3 games which went in the top 15 grossing worldwide, and we've developed more than 200 games over the last 13 years. So now what I would like to say is, first of all, it has not been a quick success. I started the company with some colleagues about 13 years ago in 2003, but I haven't started working in tech 13 years ago. I started in tech in 95, and actually when it really started was in 99 with the big boom, because it was easiest to start at the time. Now, I would like to highlight a couple of points in this transition and then to take some of the learnings from there. Today we're about 2,000 people. We did $2 billion in revenues last year, about $800 million of EBITDA, which is basically a measure of profits. We do pay taxes. We pay taxes in Europe, most of which in the UK and in Sweden. And we, however, started a company in 2003 with only 6 people. And the reason why I stand here today and why I wanted to come here is because I think we can do this again many more times. And we don't need to have 2,000 people to start a new company, which is successful. So 6 people can create something new. And what do we need to create something new with 6 people? Well, there are a couple of things. And there are a couple of things which you can really heavily contribute towards. I think the first one starts with ambition. That's the number one. And I think this is something where you can really contribute towards, is ambition. Now let me make you an example. Talking, for example, about Italy. Italy, unfortunately, is in a very kind of stuck in the middle position. Because from a size of market point of view, the market is big enough that when I start a company, I might want to focus on Italy. And for this reason, many companies in Italy start focusing on the Italian markets instead of starting immediately on a global market. Now, we started with all the developers based in Sweden, in Scandinavia. And there was no choice. We had to work and focus on global markets. I was based in the UK, in London, and there were many advantages. I'm extremely grateful to the UK for the infrastructure which I had at the time and also now. And however, the first thing was the ambition. So the ambition from day one was we have to develop. And we launched immediately in 5 languages, focusing immediately on the European market. Now, the key reason why ambition is so important is I often talk with Italian companies about valuations. And if you go to a VC with an Italian company which is focused on the Italian market, you get a valuation which is much, much lower than any valuation you would get as a US company based in Silicon Valley. And it's not just about skills, it's about the size of the market. So if an Italian company starts immediately with a global ambition and says, hey, I will start first scaling in Europe and then I will move over to the US next, then you get a valuation which is much higher. And why is it important? I met 2 days ago with a company in the US that just raised $20 million purely with an idea, nothing else. If a company goes out here, they're barely fighting for 100,000 euros. So number one, ambition. Secondly, I think culture is really important. One of the things which I've been asked often, okay, when you scaled, we scaled in a few years from 100 people to 2,000 people. because we started basically, we launched Candy in 2012. We were 100 people in 2011. Now we're at 2,000. What was really key for scaling? And I think a similar issue you're facing also every day when you're scaling countries. We want to scale digital in Italy. We want to scale digital in the UK, scale digital in Europe. What is key is culture. For us as a company, what is key from a cultural point of view is we are agile. And agile means also that failure is part of the model. When you fail, I'm not going to fire a team because they failed a game. We know that games, there is an element of chance, and you only know when you launch the game if a game is successful or not. If I were to fire a team every time a game is basically failing, I would have fired the company many times. And every time you fail, you actually learn a lot. We failed a lot. The first company I did was back in '99, and we had one of these big stories. We burned through $100 million, did the best parties in the world. We wanted to do an IPO, and ultimately we ended up selling the company for stock. And I didn't make a penny there because it was stock, and the stock basically disappeared. But I learned a lot there. And I also learned there my other co-founders. So culture is very important. And I was in Paris on Thursday at a Founders Forum event there, and I met with the Minister of Economy. And he said, France is changing because France is now, and he is supposed to become the future, one of the future, presidents. So, and he was saying, in a very good speech, we in France are changing because not only failure is not anymore an issue, but also success is not anymore seen as something which is, suspicious. So I think we need to change in culture. Success is not anymore something we should look at as something suspicious, and failure is not anymore something we should look at as something which is, despicable. So agile is very important. Failure is part of the model. The next one, I think, is we work together. And humble is something which is really important if you want to work together. If each of the countries, Italy, France, Germany, UK, thinks that they are better, we are going to go nowhere. If everyone wants to have everything in every country, replicating everything we have, we're going to go nowhere. We were discussing something just over the break, saying with a journalist, saying that in the UK they're very much at the forefront of cybersecurity. Well, actually, cybersecurity is something which is really important if you want to think about regulations, not only about how to rule, but how to ensure that the rules are enforced and that someone does not really sneak in and try to steal all the data. It's not just about what data to share, but how do we avoid that data is stolen? That's actually even more important. Now, do we have to replicate, since this is something as a skill which is very difficult to find, cybersecurity skills. Do we want to replicate in every country cybersecurity skills? Well, if possible, yes, of course, would be great. But if not, let's try to share all the skills. Let's build competence centers in Europe. And I believe one thing. When we spoke about how do we build culture in our company, they asked me, okay, but how do you ensure you have now 13 different offices in the world? How do you ensure that actually you have a similar culture everywhere? I said, well, you know what? It's very simple. Culture is lived from the top. You do not live culture from the bottom. You have to set examples. It's when the prime minister in Italy sits and speaks, he has to speak the same language as Mr. Cameron when he speaks, etc., etc. And when you talk about culture, I think we have to speak one language. And I think it starts there. And so I think topics like ambition and working together and topics like failing is fine, success is not suspicious, etc., etc. I think we have to talk the same language, and we have to help each other. And I think from there, I think we can lay the foundations for Europe. And then, of course, there are many, many more things, which I don't think we can discuss here in detail, where I think a lot of work is done really setting the fundamentals, like infrastructure. I think earlier on we discussed about infrastructure like having cable and having Wi-Fi everywhere. Well, I think also infrastructure, something which was said before, which I think is very important, is having airports, having a communication system, but also having hotels. So for example, we as a company, we organize twice a year to facilitate communication, a meeting with where we bring the entire company in one place, 2,000 people. And there are not many cities in Europe where you can bring 2,000 people in one place. So we often go to Barcelona, for example, because it's cheaper and because they have an incredible infrastructure. And we have today 2,000 people. Those 2,000 people are mainly focused on 3 cities, London, Stockholm, and Barcelona. And this is one of the reasons. So what else? So those are a couple of learnings, I think from the past. I think another key ingredient, I think, for succeeding is skills. And I started with people I knew from before. My life, if you look at my life, has been a series of opportunities taken. So I'm Italian, my heart is 100% Italian. I really love Italy. I'm from Rome, and I'm very proud to be from Rome and from Italy. But I lived a bit everywhere. So after my studies here in Italy, I went to Germany, and I lived and worked for 10 years in Germany. That's where we did our first startup back in '99. And then I was taken over I was convinced to come over to London. And actually it's very interesting to understand why did I come over to London. And the reason was that I had an offer which was too good to say no to. And actually it was so good at the beginning I thought I was suspicious. I said no. And the offer was, come over. This was from a US venture capital company called Benchmark. And they said, come over here. We give you a seat in the office, number one. Number two, we give you a salary. The salary was actually much higher than what I would have earned at the time working 100% of the time in Italy. So salary. And third, they said, if you find a good idea, we are going to invest in the idea. And that's where I thought there was the wrong thing, because if I take all these things, then I'm forced to do the investment with them. And they said, no, you're not forced. If you want, you can shop it around. You don't have to take the investment from us. And I said, okay, well, if that's the case, I'm too stupid not to take it. So I went over to London. So key thing there is we should not close our markets. I think, especially in tech, the US is at the forefront, because these guys have been working in Silicon Valley, which has been around for now more than 20 years, 30 years. And so they're very competitive, and it's a very concentrated pool of talent. And so the offers that you would have received in Silicon Valley actually are different from the ones you would receive, for example, here. They're much more competitive. And this was one of the examples of a very competitive offer. But the Silicon Valley company was based in London. And the UK has been a bit of the bridge between the US and Europe, also because of the language. But also for a reason of having an open mind towards competition and supportive and working together with the business. So this was the second thing. The third thing, which I think was also important to mention, is that I started with Benchmark, looking around for new business ideas. One of these ideas was to do online dating. We did one of the first dating sites in Europe before. And I ended up, then I got an offer from another company called UDate, which was a startup in London, to join them to build out the European market. And this was an important step because it was a British entrepreneur. We ended up selling the company after 4 months. That's where I made some money, and this money allowed me to invest in King and to start King. But what was important, our money was ending. After 12 months, we didn't get any venture capital money. We put in our own cash. After 12 months, this cash was ending. I didn't have more money. We were almost bust. And the person who I worked for, the founder of UDate, invested in me. So he gave us money. So another key learning there, entrepreneurs invest in what they know best, and it's other entrepreneurs if they are successful. I made now some money. We set up a company called Sweet Capital with the other founders of King to do angel investing. And we do angel investing anywhere. But of course, I do it where I know people. So it's primarily in Europe, of course. And this is the reason is that I don't trust banks. And I trust what I know, which is basically businesses in digital. So we're investing in digital, mobile, consumer. And from King, we had also other startups starting from there. One of the guys who used to work for me, for example, started a company called Minecraft. So they did Minecraft, which is another very successful game. And we have now other few companies which went away and they did their own companies. So I think skills is very important, and there are a few ways to build skills in Europe. The easiest one and the best one is usually spin-offs. Spin-offs from companies which are successful. I think a long-term investment, and this is something which only governments can do because no company can do that, is to invest in the very long term in education. My father used to tell me the best investment in the world is always education. It takes longer, but that's where you set the fundamentals. And I would invest in digital, and I think that the UK government does a lot here in digital development, so programming, how to program, starting from schools, How do I develop a small software, but also at university, but also building the bridges between Europe and the US. So having delegations going back and forth between Europe and the US, especially Silicon Valley, I think is very important and very useful. One last way to build skills is, if you think of how could King and our company thrive and become so big so fast, it's because we had something which was not available before, and those are platforms. We started scaling when we had Facebook, we started scaling when we had Apple, we started scaling when we had Android and Google. And we built on the base of them. Suddenly, we didn't have to have terms and conditions for every country. We didn't have to be billing for every country. We had microtransactions immediately available globally. And so we could launch a game which in a space of basically 4 months immediately became a success globally. And now allowed us to employ 2,000 people and create $2 billion in revenues and $800 million in EBITDA or profitability. So here, I think, it's really important not to work against platforms, against Google, against Facebook, against Apple, making everything in Europe totally different, even worse, different by country, because then what does it mean? Will another company in the US have it more difficult? No, because they will still focus first on scaling in the US. It will only make life more difficult for European companies if a European company wants to scale in Europe. So I think we should think exactly the opposite. We should take away any kind of barrier for growing in Europe, making it easier to grow in Europe for a European startup, for scaling in Europe, than it is for a US startup. Does it make sense? What do you think? Yeah, so those are a couple of thoughts. And with that, thank you so much. And by the way, I would like really to thank you for this incredible event. I think, if I'm not wrong, it's the first time that there is a meeting of this sort in digital. And I think this is really setting history. And I hope that from here, the future will be amazing. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Riccardo. Thank you.